In the winter of 1833, when snow blanketed the cobblestone streets of Lower Manhattan, a peculiar establishment opened its doors on Mulberry Street. The brass nameplate read simply Murphy House for the Infirm. To passersby, it appeared as nothing more than another charitable institution, one of many that had begun sprouting throughout the growing city as waves of immigrants sought refuge and care. The Murphy family had arrived from County Cork just 3 years prior. Seamus Murphy, a man of considerable girth with kind eyes and a gentle Irish brogue, had quickly established himself as a pillar of the community. His wife, Bridget, possessed a sort of nurturing disposition that drew troubled souls like moths to flame. Their 3 children, Colm, the eldest at 28, Mary Catherine, 25, and young Patrick, barely 22, had each inherited their parents' apparent dedication to helping society's forgotten members. The institution began modestly. Word spread through the Irish neighborhoods that the Murphys offered shelter, warm meals, and medical care to those who had nowhere else to turn. The desperate came first: elderly men whose families had cast them aside, young women with nowhere to go, children orphaned by the cholera, epidemics that periodically swept through the tenements. What made the Murphy House different from other charitable institutions was its complete privacy. No city inspectors were welcomed. No religious organizations were permitted to visit. The family insisted that their patients needed absolute quiet and isolation to recover properly. Neighbors occasionally heard sounds from within, sometimes singing, sometimes what might have been crying, but Seamus Murphy would simply explain that healing was often a noisy process. The first sign that something was amiss came in the spring of 1834. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, a society woman who kept meticulous records of the city's charitable works, noticed that no one who entered Murphy House ever seemed to emerge. When she inquired politely about their success rates, Bridget Murphy's eyes took on a distant quality. "Our patients find such peace here," Bridget would say, wringing her hands in her apron. "Many choose to stay on, to help others as they were helped. It becomes a calling, you see." Mrs. Whitman found this explanation troubling, but the Murphy family's reputation remained spotless. They attended church regularly, contributed generously to community causes, and Seamus Murphy was often seen helping elderly neighbors with their daily tasks. The cognitive dissonance between the family's public persona and the strange isolation of their institution created a kind of willful blindness among their neighbors. As months turned to years, the Murphy house expanded. The family purchased adjacent buildings, connecting them through a maze of corridors and basement passages. The sounds from within grew more frequent and varied. Sometimes neighbors reported hearing what sounded like multiple voices singing hymns late into the night. Other times, there were sounds that resembled construction work, hammering, sawing, the scraping of heavy objects being moved. Young Patrick Murphy, the most social of the children, would often be seen at the local taverns, buying drinks for anyone willing to listen to his stories. He spoke of the miraculous recoveries happening at Murphy House, of patients who had been so transformed by their experience that they became entirely new people. His eyes would shine with an almost religious fervor as he described the beautiful work his family was doing. The truth behind Murphy House was far more complex than anyone could have imagined. The family had indeed begun with genuine charitable intentions. Seamus Murphy had witnessed terrible suffering during the potato famines in Ireland, and his desire to help was authentic. But somewhere in those early months, the line between healing and controlling had become blurred. The patients who entered Murphy House were not actually leaving because they were not permitted to leave. The family had developed an elaborate system of dependency, convincing their charges that the outside world was too dangerous, too cruel for people who had been broken by life. They were told that Murphy House was their sanctuary, their only hope for safety and belonging. What had begun as extended care had evolved into something resembling a cult. The patients, isolated from any outside contact, gradually adopted the Murphy family's worldview entirely. They participated in elaborate daily routines designed to reinforce their dependence. They worked in the basement workshops, creating goods that Seamus would sell in the markets, bringing income to support the growing household. The singing that neighbors heard was real. It was part of nightly ceremonies where patients would express gratitude for their salvation from the harsh world beyond the walls. The construction sounds were also genuine. The patients themselves were constantly expanding and modifying their living space, creating more elaborate hiding places and secret passages. Mary Catherine Murphy had become the institution's unofficial physician. Despite having no formal training, she dispensed homemade remedies and performed crude surgical procedures that often left patients permanently dependent on the family's care. Her medical journal, discovered decades later, revealed a disturbing pattern of experiments designed not to heal, but to ensure long-term dependency. Colm Murphy managed the psychological aspects of patient control. He had developed sophisticated techniques for breaking down individual identity and rebuilding it around loyalty to the Murphy family. Former patients would eventually become recruiters, venturing into the city to identify new candidates for salvation. The system might have continued indefinitely, but in 1867, a fire broke out in one of the connected buildings. When the volunteer fire brigade arrived, they discovered not a small charitable institution, but a sprawling complex housing nearly 200 people. The patients, many of whom had been missing for decades, were found in various states of physical and psychological dependency. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of the Murphy family's operation. City records showed that over the 34-year period, more than 800 people had entered Murphy House, with only 12 recorded departures. The basement workshops contained evidence of a thriving underground economy, with goods produced by patient labor being sold throughout Manhattan. Most disturbing of all was the discovery that many patients had arrived as temporary residents but had been gradually convinced that they were incurably ill, mentally unstable, or socially unfit for independent living. Medical examinations revealed that many were perfectly healthy individuals who had simply been isolated and manipulated over years or decades. The Murphy family faced no criminal charges. In 1868, the legal framework for addressing such psychological manipulation simply did not exist. The institution was closed, and the family quietly relocated to Philadelphia, where they opened a similar establishment under a different name. The patients presented the most complex challenge. Many had spent so many years in the Murphy House system that they genuinely feared independent living. Some had formed deep emotional bonds with their captors and refused to testify against them. A special municipal program was established to gradually reintegrate former patients into society, but the process was slow and often unsuccessful. The building on Mulberry Street stood empty for several years before being demolished. In its place, the city built a small park with a simple memorial plaque that read, "In memory of those who suffered in silence." Most passersby assumed it commemorated victims of the Civil War. The story of Murphy House became a whispered legend in certain circles, a cautionary tale about the fine line between charity and control, between healing and imprisonment. It served as an early reminder that institutional power, even when cloaked in benevolence, requires constant scrutiny and accountability. The Murphy family's legacy lived on in the form of improved regulations for charitable institutions, mandatory inspections, and the legal recognition that psychological manipulation could be as harmful as physical abuse. Their hidden institution of terror had inadvertently helped create the framework for protecting society's most vulnerable members from those who would exploit their trust and desperation. In the end, the true horror of Murphy House was not supernatural, but profoundly human: the capacity for ordinary people to convince themselves that control was compassion, that isolation was protection, and that the exercise of absolute power over the helpless was somehow an act of love.